Welcome, everybody, to the Stress Test Podcast with Hammad and Rocky. Interesting weekend this weekend, huh? I think there's
Lots going on.
lots going
on the interwebs.
Yeah, on the intrawebs, on the Google machines. I think we'll probably dice these episodes up. So I think one of the things we wanted to talk about was Obama and his comments on social media at Stanford University this past weekend.
I find it super interesting that these comments come at a time
It's very interesting.
where certain things are happening in the world, or should I say in the cyber world,
In the cyber world.
where large numbers are being thrown out and accepted, but we'll get into that later.
We'll get into that later.
But
Yeah.
I do find that interesting. I find that timing spot on
Yeah.
as part of the comments.
I mean, I do want to, give him the benefit of the doubt. He might have been at a symposium and it was just asked of him, considering the environment that we're in now, like, hey, what are your thoughts on this? But I do want to kind of do a deep analysis, if you will, on some of those comments and really evaluate what your thoughts and my thoughts are specifically on that narrative.
Yeah. Well, how about maybe we sort of give some context to what we're talking about, and then then we can talk about it.
Yes, we can. So, recently, last week, Thursday, speaking at Stanford University, Obama said that social media, I don't want to say said, I think I should be more explicit. He blames social media for turbocharging some of humanity's worst impulses. Quote, one of the biggest reasons for democracy's weakening is the profound change that's taken place in how we communicate and how we consume information.
And correct me if I'm wrong, I think he says it's one of the biggest reasons of a weakening democracy here in the United States.
So specifically, he said, due to the algorithms imposed by these social media companies around content moderation, the way they rank these posts and provide these to users have made democracies much more vulnerable moving forward.
I will say there is truth in some of the things that he said, in my opinion. However, I think your conclusion he arrived at is invalid, or is incorrect. Let me put
Is unfounded, right?
Yeah, What are your thoughts, first of all? What are your thoughts on what he said?
I think he's a hypocrite to some extent. I do think that he was hugely beneficial off the technology that enabled him, whether it be financial. Also,
You're a Trump supporter.
Huh?
Calm down. Trump supporter.
Got
Trump supporter over
You'll
here.
never catch me with a red hat on, but I know the sarcasm is there. And to your point, yes, I am not. Before I get ostracized, allow me
alt-right movement. It's like the only Polynesian in the alt-right
I know,
movement.
right? In the alt-right group. But before I ostracize myself and get myself kicked out of the progressive movement, if you will, I do think that it's hypocrisy, right? Like, from the standpoint of the same thing that he's claiming turbocharging the humanity's worst impulses, I would argue was the same mechanism or machination that turbocharged his ability to become president at a very young age. Like I don't,
Social
I have
media,
no idea exactly.
the young audience,
Yeah,
because that's who voted for him.
Yeah,
like the
and a
people who were just
majority of
becoming
tech
voters.
backed him from a company standpoint.
Right.
From Facebook all the way up to Twitter, like these are the same companies that backed him,
Right.
and ensured that he, I don't want to say biased towards him, but they favor Democrats overall. I mean,
Yeah, especially in modern, like in the past 2 decades, at the very least.
In the past 2 decades,
right?
yeah. So I would argue that it's very hypocritical for him to claim that, and I'm not saying he doesn't have the right to do so, right? He's probably looking at it from the lens of like, hey, it's turbocharging some of humanity's worst impulses, but That's what happens when you're in a very connected environment. You're turbocharging all impulses, right? Like, so, like, I think you're kind of neglecting the good that social media has done. I know a lot of people don't probably agree with that, but back to just quick or having the throughput of information that we have now, right? Which is the velocity of which the velocity of which information travels at. I think it's just hard for you to kind of like moderate that. I feel like this is kind of similar to like the whole argument against encryption. Do you remember that argument?
It's
so
escaping me.
Remember when the government was saying we should weaken encryption
or
allow backdoors?
Yeah.
Yeah, like these are kind of things that you can't really decouple. Like I understand, like I think moderation as it's happening right now, the amount having worked at Facebook, right? Like the amount of capital that has been invested to be able to moderate these platforms, for better or worse, right? Like the investment is there, and for him to kind of like just with a slap in the face say we are turbocharging some of humanity's worst impulses, I would claim there's hypocrisy there. But let me pass the mic to you because I can go on a tangent on this forever.
You know, it's interesting what he's. I would say, so I want to be very clear. I'm talking about social media in general.
Yeah.
I would say, yes, there are drawbacks, and we've talked about some of those drawbacks and the negative aspects. But I would say those things are where certain opinions are getting suppressed in current social media outlets.
Elaborate on
Twitter, TikTok. I'm assuming other social media outlets as well, where if you have an opinion that is against the grain or against the popular opinion, which in modern day seems to be not against the liberal opinion, the extreme liberal, extreme left opinion, then you are automatically or somewhat you're suppressed because the loudest people in the room happen to be a lot of times the liberals. We've discussed that to some degree and like the nuances
in the last podcast.
Exactly, and the nuances with respect to that.
Do we want to revisit that discussion or later?
Maybe later, but just I want to touch on that because yes, there are some drawbacks, right? There's those drawbacks that exist. However, that's not anything in favor of what he said. He's saying it from the perspective of a liberal, a Democrat.
Yeah.
Right? And I actually think that social media has made it better for democracy. There's more information out there.
I see what you're saying.
You're able to communicate your opinion, right? No matter what your opinion may be, which is the point of a democracy. It's not the point of a democracy. We are not in the United States a pure democracy, if you don't know that already. We are a flawed republic.
Yeah.
Where we think we're voting for people, but you're actually voting for people who can actually change their mind, aka the Electoral College.
Yep.
You're voting for the Electoral College in actuality.
Or they don't represent your best interests.
Or they represent your best interests, right? Yeah. You vote for a person of the Electoral College, and the Electoral College could vote entirely against your intentions.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So it's actually a flawed democracy. This is a mechanism of control that the U.S. government has in place that makes it harder for people like us, for votes like ours to count. It does. It just when you add layers like that, it makes it harder for our votes to count. A pure democracy would be our votes go directly to the candidate that we vote for.
Yeah.
Right? Now, that being said, I want to dive too deep into that. But in our current society, again, we have media outlets like Fox News, CNN, CNBC, etc. They all have very specific opinions. If you listen to one news outlet, you would think the world just that way.
Yeah.
But then you go outside, do your own research a little bit, or go to another news outlet, and you realize, well, maybe the world isn't just that way. Maybe there's some nuances that are not being mentioned or skipped over, or there's some like headlines that are being perpetuated that aren't the whole truth.
Yeah, I mean, it's confirmation bias,
right?
too, right?
Exactly. Yeah. And so that's hiding. That, in my opinion, is misinformation. Like, there are going to be a lot of people out there, CNN, like people who love CNN, love Anderson Cooper, they're like, oh, no, what are you talking about? Like, no, but they choose to report what they want to report.
Yeah.
And they choose not to report what they don't want to report. Right? So doesn't that inherently make it misinformation? Like, I think that is misinformation. If you're going to be biased towards what you choose to report, right, and report very specific angles in a very biased way, you're biasing and you're like you said, confirmation bias,
Yeah.
introducing that to your viewers. So social media allows anybody to report something.
Provide a perspective.
Perspective. Yes, maybe some people are doing it for negative reasons, but I think there's a lot more people who might be doing it just like who are just saying like what's going on. Like even if you don't trust like obviously there's like loud voices out there, but at least somebody has a voice to go out there and put something in, right? Now we've talked about the Twitter censorship stuff to some degree before, so I don't want to dive into that. But put that aside, and there's a platform where I could go and if I saw something happening on the street, or if I saw something happening in like in the city or something, I could post it.
Yeah.
Right? To the best of my truth that I see, and let people judge for themselves what they're seeing.
Agree.
Right? Whereas these news outlets are very biased and to report an angle that they choose to report, or to whoever controls them, which are large media corporations. They're not there for the best interests of the people.
Oh yeah.
Right? So, but they are working in collaboration with the quote unquote establishment, like the government and the politicians. They have an agreement. Right? There's a reason the debates are held on these major news outlets is because they have an agreement and a mutual understanding of how things work. It's the status quo. This social media introduces something that's outside the status quo, and anytime a politician sees something that's outside the status quo, it's immediately considered a threat.
I do want to talk about that too. What establishments are attacking social media at this point in time, or just tech in general?
Who has the most to lose?
Exactly. You know where I'm going with that, right? Like, so media, right? So, for example, if I've had a chokehold on, like, viewers' perspective, if you will, if there is no other path for you to get your information from, right? You have to get it from me, CNN, CNBC, Fox News, whoever, then that drives revenue for me. That gives me an incentive to ensure that I maintain that power, right?
Yep. And they're all controlled, like I said, by large corporations.
I would say oligarchies at this point in time.
Exactly.
Yeah.
There's sort of oligarchy in the United States.
The Murdoch family. You can even look at CNN and the families that are connected there. Disney behind ABC.
Exactly. And they're the ones who control the politicians. They're the ones that have the money going to the lobbying and therefore influencing the politicians. That includes Obama. Yeah. Like, I voted for Obama. I've just come to a realization in the past few years where I'm sort of just, I don't take everything these folks say, no matter how much I like them, at face value.
So you're not, essentially what you're saying, and please correct me if I'm wrong here, I don't want to put words in your mouth. You're saying you're not just following an ideology anymore. You're looking at the nuances regardless of who's representing it.
Yeah.
To ensure that it fits your, I guess, foundational beliefs.
Exactly. And I think I was always like that, but I did, like, for example, even Bernie Sanders, there's things about him that I've come to learn that aren't the best.
Yeah.
Obama the same way.
Yeah.
Like, how many promises did he keep of his campaign?
Oh, yeah.
Almost done. But
I would argue that there's nuances there.
Oh, exactly. Nuance. That's what I was going to say. There's like, I think there's, you have to be aiming for something high.
Yeah.
And then you'll achieve something. But if you don't aim high, you don't achieve anything. So I'm not going to put him too much to the ringer on that. However, I do think that, I've just become more jaded with specific candidates.
I will be devil's advocate here. I do want to nitpick the actual comment of turbocharging some of humanity's worst impulses.
Yep.
I want to play devil's advocate from the standpoint, and even contradict myself here by saying he's a hypocrite to some extent. That if you look at that nomenclature or the verbiage you use there, he's actually really accurate there, right? Like, you can honestly say that social media has turbocharged some of humanity's worst impulses, but it's primarily based on the fact that technology has improved the efficiency of our communication getting from point A to point B, right? And now we can reach a scale that we could never imagine before.
Yeah.
So to your point, like, I agree with you, but at the same time, I want to play devil's advocate and kind of agree with Obama on this standpoint, but I don't think for the intents that he's kind of conveying.
Like I said,
right?
some of the points he made were valid. There's validity in some of the points that he made. It's just that conclusion he arrived at where it's destroying the democracy. I think it's
and I think the timing is very convenient.
Exactly.
All right.
Yeah. Just to answer the general question, I think it's made it better.
Yeah.
because we have a lot more voices being heard. Even no matter what you think about the voices or your opinions.
You're saying it represents a true democracy versus
Exactly.
you know,
I mean,
yeah.
Democrats
I agree with
lost.
that.
Democrats lost to Trump because Trump utilized the power of social media.
Yeah.
That's not his fault. That's Democrats' fault for not utilizing the tools that they have.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And the Clinton administration was super lazy as far as when they were.
I don't think they were as proactive as they probably should have
Well,
been.
social media won, but they also didn't campaign in some of the
yeah.
major states that they lost.
And if you
which
think
cost
about
the
it too,
election.
from a social media standpoint, the Democrats were able to leverage that during this go around with the Senates. For example, the Georgia runoff, where we had 2 Democrats win the state of Georgia's open seats for the first time in 30 years, 40 years.
Mm-hmm.
So
Right.
I think they were able to leverage social media efficiently there, but I just don't think they're going to be able to maintain it at this pace.
I think that
with,
was. I don't even know if that was social media. Honestly, I think that was just the pendulum swinging the other way.
Yeah, I think that's an aspect as well, right? Because I do think the pendulum is going to swing back. I mean, data already showcases that a lot of folks who were leaning towards Democrats in the last election are likely leading towards Republicans towards this election. And it's to the point that you brought up previously. I don't think Biden was able to influence or keep as many promises as he suggested. One thing you can actually say about Trump, whether you like him or not, was he was able to deliver on some of his core promises, whether it was to all constituents or some. He was able to actually deliver on some of them. I don't think he gets enough credit for the vaccine. But once again, I don't think that's the point of this discussion. I think we want to focus on just the social media's role in turbocharging some of humanity's worst impulses. I do think it's easier said than done, though. I think, for example, I brought up the encryption analogy before, where people think, oh, we can just build a backdoor and maintain security. It's like, no. By building that backdoor, you're gonna efficiently destroy the amount of security
Because
that
it will be
guarantees you.
found. It will be found.
Exactly.
There are very brilliant people out there that will find and crack it. There's no even the most powerful that we think up to every year, the most powerful algorithm we think of gets cracked.
Yeah.
Right. Whatever algorithm some company's using to do something,
and that's
it
because
gets
their
cracked.
computational power just continues to increase.
Exactly.
Right. But back to this, I think it's easy for people to kind of say oh yeah, we're just gonna put in policies that'll help us solve this issue, and it's it's not that easy.
I just question the motive. I question motives.
Yeah.
The again, you talked about who wins, who gains.
And you should. Yeah.
Who gains from this?
Yeah.
The media companies from lambashing the social media that is not under any one company's control as far as the content. Well, we would hope, right? Twitter has some problems, right? But the media outlets are losing out.
Yeah.
Because users are using social media more and more, YouTube, Twitter, etc. Right? The politicians lose out because they're very ingrained in their process and they have control over how to impact their constituents and how to get the votes they need with a bunch of relaying a bunch of bullshit in some outlet and then getting the votes that way. But now that we have these other outlets that are giving us more content to base our decision off of, it's a danger to them because they can't control that content.
Oh yeah.
And
the narrative is no longer within their
when
control.
these politicians can't control the content that users are seeing, right, and that some of that content may work against them, it's immediately a threat to democracy. And before, where it was a limited number of people controlling what people saw, and back in the day when you didn't have communication like this, decisions were being made without people even knowing, and they would find out weeks later a decision or law was passed.
Yeah.
Right? Because imagine when the U.S. was first founded.
Yeah.
Decisions were being made in Pennsylvania, the original capital, right? And then after D.C., and then communication would take a while to arrive by horseback or messenger or whatever.
Yep.
And nobody could have enough time to be wait a second, hold up, you can't just do that.
I want to talk more about that though, the intent, right? With the intent of these policies, and I think I 100% agree with you on that. one of the things that has been brought up is Section 230, which is, the laws that allow platforms to not be responsible or legally responsible for the things stated on their platform. So, for example, like, how people can provide misinformation, right? On Facebook, Twitter, or social media platform B, A, whatever, right? Typically, let's say a journalist or something prints something of libel or misinformation, more specifically speaking, on the New York Times. The New York Times would be liable for that, right? So what Republicans and Democrats seem to agree upon is giving or punishing these social media companies at the same rate that they're
very unified there,
they're unified there.
Very unified.
And that's why I kind of want to bring up intent and say, like, I think you're onto something there, because that they never agree.
Yeah.
Right?
Well, in the public eye, they never agree because they need to create conflict, and that's a different topic.
Touche. And we definitely should talk about that at some point in time. But in the context of this discussion, I 100% agree with you on the fact that if it benefits both of them, which is kind of weird because it never does, but for some reason this stance does. So Section 230 is something that I think they fear, right? They fear internet companies or social media companies specifically having the power to kind of control the narrative in a way that they haven't been able to control in quite some time.
Yeah, right? Because they want that control themselves. Yeah. Misinformation is okay as long as we give it to you.
Yeah, exactly, right?
Misinformation is... I consider misinformation anything when you exclude certain truths and exclude certain facts, especially from a entity that is there governing you and you've elected, quote unquote, elected to put in place. I consider that misinformation.
I always wonder whether these news corporations are colluding with each other in order to keep us divided. Sometimes I wonder,
because remember Jack Dorsey decided in the Twitter, right? Like somebody made a comment about. What was I forgot what the comment was, but Jack Dorsey said, well, we also suffer under a two-party. Nobody thinks that two-party system is best, but here we are, right? Because he was calling them out, where they were calling out something. I forgot exactly what the politician was calling out. And then he responded with saying, wait a second, so you're saying that about that, but the two-party system is okay when nobody likes it?
Yeah.
Right. And there's the two-party system exists because it allows the two parties to control much of the agenda and much of the narrative.
Yeah.
This is why it's against their interest. Like, as soon as you add, they don't want to lose their influence. So that's why they're against moving away from two-party system.
Yeah.
It's complete horseshit.
I mean, and think about it too, right? Like, if I'm playing a game, it's easier for me to deal with one opponent than it is for N opponents, right? So for us to have a two-party system, it benefits both parties because they only have to worry about one party versus N number of parties that can attack them from different perspectives.
It's easier to collude with one other party as well.
Yeah, that's true too. Yeah. I also think, I found it. House of Republicans was going at him. So House of Republicans said, this would be a good time, Jack, to answer why Twitter suppressed the Hunter Biden laptop story, which we discussed on here. And they stated, you still haven't answered the question. No one is buying that this was a process error. And Jack replied, no one's buying a two-party system is good for the people either, but here we are. So, yeah. I think like sometimes we jump over dollars to pick up pennies, right? And I think sometimes we get lost in the system. Really, we should be questioning why we have a two-party system and how are they benefiting us as a society. I think we trust these, politicians.
Besides creating these extreme polls on left and right.
Yeah, which benefits them.
It benefits them, not us.
Not us, yeah. And who knows? Maybe they're colluding, and I don't want to put on my conspiracy tinfoil hat here, but to some extent, there's got to be some kind of colluding effort here going on. But
I'm going to make another point, and before we wrap up this social media and democracy thing, is the fact that we can have these opinions and question our government is another benefit of social media.
Oh, yeah. And then be able to present this
and be
online
able to present it.
Yeah.
Right? Like, this wasn't a thing before.
Yeah.
Like, you wouldn't be hearing about those people who have different opinions.
Agree.
Like, whether it was in a small newspaper or something. Like, now we have social media that can broadcast our thoughts and see all the different things where there's inconsistencies in what the government tells us. You can make and formulate your own decisions and your own opinions. Obviously, we have some opinions that we think that the government is not necessarily acting, not the government itself. I think the individuals in the government, elected positions in the government, are not necessarily acting in the best interests of society, or our society at least.
Yeah.
There's an agenda and an incentive there to stay and maintain power.
I agree.
That's the truth that all governments have had to deal with forever, like since history, right?
Yeah. So in summary, I guess I think one of the things that we probably agree on, the intent probably being misplaced by Obama in this discussion. I don't think that, I just want to understand what the intent of him calling that out was. And then B, there is really, and I think it has to be an iterative process. I think we are where we need to be. But I do think he's just piling on, or he's joining the school of fish that is attacking tech with no real substance, right? Like, I don't see any
very
substantial
agenda-backed.
Yeah.
Statement.
I think it's more ideology because the media said it. I'm going to just jump on this train and say, hey, social media is bad because they propagate bad thoughts really fast.
Yeah.
I will say this, though. One of the things that I do question is, while bad thoughts do propagate really quickly and scale very, I guess, far with misinformation, can we say the same thing about, what's the term I'm looking for here? Whenever you're coming back and you're saying, like, hey, that was a miscommunication or something like that. It's
retrospective?
No, not retrospective. I can't think of the term right now. But there's a term when ever you have, retort? No, it's not retort. I can't think of the word, but like, is there a self-healing aspect to social media that we just haven't seen yet? So, for example, whenever anyone puts out a correction, I always see the first punch, right, if you will, but I never see the correction or the apology for the mistake that they made, right? I usually never see that, actually. So I think, how can social media kind of signal boost that to ensure that it's quote-unquote self-healing whenever it's providing misinformation on a platform?
You know why you don't see it?
Why?
Even if it's there? Is because you probably heard about it from one of the major news outlets. And they're just broadcasting what they want to, which might be the negative aspect. And if they apologize after the fact or come to understand it, they probably don't broadcast that.
Yeah, I mean, that's a good point. I used to see things on, like, update here, and I would never see... it would be a footnote, essentially, in certain broadcasts. But I think now I've kind of swayed away. I wonder, like, I would say probably less than 5% of my news is consumed via CNN or Fox News.
Well, I think a lot of people they just have headlines and like the news apps that you have on your phone. You'll see some headlines like CNN headline, MSNBC headline, etc.
Yeah.
And so they might be talking about like a Twitter post or something in that headline.
Yeah,
which is hilarious, I find, because why the hell do we need you in the first place?
You're just like a wasteful middleman here, or middle person, if you will. But I think I agree with that. But let's close this one out. Yeah. I think we kind of disagree with the intent, but we do agree that I think I just disagree more with just
the statement,
pinpointing the statement versus.
I mean, it's like I said, valid points. Yeah. Some valid points.
Yeah.
But the whole thing about it hurting democracy is complete bullshit and straw man, in my opinion.
Yeah, I think so too.
Well, what do you think? Let us know down in the comments below what your thoughts are on Obama saying that social media is destroying our democracy. Do you agree? Disagree? What do you want us to talk about? Do you want us to dive a little deeper into that? Let us know. Anything else you want to add?
No, not right now.
Cool. Well, Thank you, and like and subscribe. Subscribe. See you next time.
See ya. Peace.